I was almost the Mouth of Sauron. I passed the tests. I survived the trials. I made it to the final selection with 5 other children, and we stood before the agents and heard what the role would cost, what we would have to give up, what we would become. 4 children refused immediately. 1 hesitated and then refused. And then there was me and 1 other boy. His name was... No, I should not say it. He has no name now. He burned it 40 years ago, in a ritual I did not witness but have heard described. He said yes. He went to Barad-dur. He became the 8th Mouth of Sauron. And I said no. I kept my name. I kept myself. I served the Dark Lord in other ways, conventional ways, and I have spent 40 years wondering if I made the right choice. Until 3 months ago, when I saw him again. When I witnessed what he had become, and I understood that there are worse things than death. Let me tell you what I saw. Let me tell you what it costs to become the Mouth of Sauron. And let me tell you why I will never regret refusing, even though part of me wonders, still, if I chose weakness over strength. My name is Hazad. I was born in Umbar in the year 2978 of the Third Age, 1 year before the boy who would become the Mouth. We were not friends as children. Our families moved in different circles. But I knew of him, as you know of anyone in a community like ours. His family were true believers, fanatics even among the Black Númenóreans. They spoke of Sauron with a reverence that bordered on worship. My family served as well, but with more pragmatism. We believed in strength, in power, in backing the winning side. But we did not romanticize it the way his family did. When the agents came to Umbar looking for candidates, both our fathers brought us forward. We were 12 years old, and we had no idea what we were being offered. The testing began in a compound outside the city. 50 children, all between 10 and 14, all from Black Númenórean families. The agents told us we were being evaluated for special service to the Dark Lord. They did not tell us what that service was. Not at first. The tests started simply enough. Memory exercises. They would recite long lists of names, genealogies, entire passages of text, and we had to repeat them back perfectly. I was good at this. I had always had a good memory. So did the other boy, the one who would become the Mouth. We both excelled. Children who could not keep up were sent home. No punishment, or no shame. Just not suitable. Then came language tests. They taught us phrases in Sindarin, in Haradric, in tongues I had never heard. Expected us to pronounce them correctly after hearing them once, to understand patterns, to deduce grammar from context. Again, I did well. So did he. We were among perhaps 20 who passed this stage. Then the tests became harder. They locked us in dark cells for days at a time. No food, limited water, just darkness and silence. Testing our will, testing whether we would break. I spent 5 days in that cell, and I will not lie, it was terrible. The hunger was bad, the thirst was worse, but the silence was the worst of all. Nothing to do but think, and thinking in the dark leads to dark places. But I endured. I told myself this was temporary, that it would end, that I just had to last. When they finally opened the door, I walked out on shaking legs, but I walked out, standing. The boy who would become the Mouth walked out, steady, calm, as if the 5 days had not touched him at all. I noticed that, noticed the difference between us. He had not just endured, he had been comfortable. Then came the pain tests. They were careful to explain these were not punishments, not torture for its own sake, just evaluation, testing our tolerance, our ability to remain functional under duress. They used fire, held our hands over flames, not long enough to cause permanent damage, but long enough to hurt. Hurt badly. I still have small scars on my palms from those tests. They used pressure points, techniques that sent agony through your entire body without leaving marks, and they watched to see who would scream, who would beg, who would maintain control. I didn't scream. I bit through my lip, holding it back. But I didn't scream. The boy who would become the mouth didn't even seem to feel it. His face remained calm, distant, as if the pain was happening to someone else. By the time we finished the pain tests, only 6 of us remained from the original 50. We were brought before the lead agent, a black Númenórean who was older than any man I had ever seen, with eyes that looked through you rather than at you. And he told us what we had been tested for. Told us we were candidates to become the next Mouth of Sauron. I had heard the title before, but did not truly understand what it meant. I thought it was just a position, a role, like being a general or an administrator. He explained it was more than that, much more. He told us that if we accepted, we would be taken to Barad-dur, that we would spend the next 2 decades in training, learning languages, history, diplomacy, the arts of negotiation and manipulation, that we would be educated to become the voice of Sauron himself. And I thought, yes, this sounds like an honor. This sounds like something worth doing. Then he told us the rest. He told us that at the end of the training, we would undergo a ritual that would erase our birth names, that would cut away our memories of family, of childhood, of anything personal that made us individuals, that would transform us from people into vessels, instruments of Sauron's will. He was very clear about this, very explicit. This was not metaphorical. This was literal erasure. You would lose your name, lose your identity, lose yourself. You would become the Mouth of Sauron. Nothing more and nothing less. A living tool for the Dark Lord's purposes. And he told us we could refuse, that there was no shame in refusal, that we could go home and serve Sauron in other ways, that this choice was ours. 4 of the children refused immediately. I watched them stand and bow and walk out of the compound, and I envied their certainty. They had heard the price, and known instantly it was too high. One other boy sat for a long time thinking, and then he stood and left as well. That left me and the boy who would become the Mouth. And I was terrified, because I didn't know what to choose. Part of me wanted to accept. This was the highest service. This was power and purpose and meaning. But another part of me, a part I did not want to acknowledge, was screaming that this was wrong, and that giving up your name was giving up everything, that becoming a tool meant ceasing to be human. I looked at the other boy. His face was calm, certain, and I knew he was going to say yes. The agent looked at us both. "You may take time to decide," he said. "You may go home, speak with your families, and return with your answer tomorrow." I nodded, grateful for the reprieve, grateful for time to think. The other boy spoke immediately. "I do not need time," he said. His voice was steady, clear. "I accept. I will go to Barad-dur. I will train. I will undergo the ritual. I will become the Mouth of Sauron." Just like that. No hesitation. No doubt. And the agent smiled. "Good," he said. "You are ready." Then he looked at me. "And you?" I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I need time," I said. "I need to think." The agent nodded. "Tomorrow, then. Return here at dawn with your answer." I went home that night and didn't sleep. I sat with my father and told him everything. told him what the role required, what it would cost. He listened carefully, and then he said something I did not expect. He said, "You are my son. Whatever you choose, I will support. But I will tell you this. A name is not a small thing. Our name connects us to our ancestors, to our family, to our history. To burn that away. I understand the honor. I understand the power. But I also understand what you would lose. And I am not certain the trade is worth it." I asked him what he thought I should do. He said, "Only you can decide that. But I will tell you that I would prefer to have a son with a name than to know my son serves as a nameless vessel, or no matter how powerful." At dawn, I returned to the compound. The other boy was already there. We stood before the agent together. He looked at the other boy first. "You are certain?" "Yes." "Then you will leave for Barad-dur in 3 days. Prepare yourself." Then he looked at me, and I took a breath and I said, "I refuse. I will not become the Mouth of Sauron." The agent nodded, as if he had expected this. "You are certain?" "Yes." "Very well. You have served well in these trials. Your skills are noted. You may return home." And that was it. No judgment, no disappointment, just acceptance. I had made my choice. The other boy had made his. And our paths diverged in that moment. I watched him leave 3 days later. Watched as he boarded a ship that would take him east to Mordor. His family was there to see him off, weeping with pride, and my father stood with me, his hand on my shoulder. "You made the right choice," he said. But I was not certain. I felt like a coward, like I had been offered greatness and chosen safety instead. The boy who would become the Mouth looked back once before boarding the ship. Our eyes met, and I saw something in his face. Not contempt, not pity, just certainty. He knew he had chosen correctly, and I did not know if I had. I served Sauron in other ways over the years. I trained as a soldier, fought in skirmishes along the borders of Gondor, rose through the ranks to become a captain in the forces of Umbar. I was good at what I did, competent, reliable, but I was not special. I was just another soldier in an army of thousands. And sometimes, late at night, I would wonder about the boy who had said yes. Wonder what he had become, whether he regretted his choice, whether the ritual had truly erased him, or if some part of him remained, trapped and screaming inside whatever he had become. I told myself I had made the right choice, that keeping my name, myself, my humanity, that was worth more than any power. But I wondered. 40 years passed. I am 52 years old now. Still serving, though my body is not what it once was. Still a captain, though I have risen no higher. Still wondering sometimes what my life would have been if I had said yes. And then, 3 months ago, I received orders. I was to travel to Barad-dur, to serve as part of an honor guard for negotiations between Sauron's forces and envoys from Hazâd. It was not explained why I specifically was chosen. I am not important enough to warrant such a posting, but orders are orders. So I traveled to Mordor, to the Dark Tower, to the place where the boy I once knew had been transformed into something else. Barad-dur was beyond anything I had imagined. The tower rose so high, its peak was lost in the clouds of ash and smoke that perpetually shrouded Mordor. The walls were black stone, perfectly smooth, inscribed with runes that seemed to move when you looked at them. The air was thick and hot, hard to breathe, and everything smelled of sulfur and fire. I was brought to barracks deep in the tower, told to prepare for the negotiations that would take place in 2 days. And I asked, carefully, who would be conducting the negotiations on Sauron's behalf. The officer who briefed me looked at me strangely. "The Mouth, of course," he said. "Who else?" And my heart began to pound, because I would see him, or the boy who had said yes, the one who had become the Mouth of Sauron. After 40 years, I would see what he had become. The negotiations took place in a great hall, deep in Barad-dur. The envoys from Hazâd were seated on one side of a long table. We, the honor guard, stood along the walls, and then he entered, the Mouth of Sauron. He wore robes of black and red, inscribed with runes in the black speech. His face was covered by a helm, a great thing of black iron shaped like a sneering visage. And when he spoke, his voice filled the hall. It was not loud, it did not need to be. It simply commanded attention in a way I cannot adequately describe. Deep, resonant, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in your chest. He greeted the Haradrim envoys in their own language, flawlessly, and began the negotiations. Well, I watched him work, and it was like watching a master craftsman. He spoke with perfect precision, choosing each word for maximum effect. He would offer concessions that sounded generous but cost nothing. He would make demands that sounded reasonable but gave Sauron everything. He read the envoys perfectly, adjusted his approach based on their reactions, found their pressure points, and exploited them without mercy. Within an hour, he had secured terms that heavily favored Mordor, and the Haradrim were thanking him for his fairness. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. And through it all, his voice never wavered, never showed emotion, never revealed anything that could be called human. When the negotiations concluded, the envoys were escorted out. The Mouth remained, reviewing documents, making notes in a script I did not recognize, and I found myself walking toward him. I do not know why. Perhaps I needed to know, needed to see if any part of the boy I had known still existed. I approached and waited until he looked up. Even through the helm, I could feel his gaze, cold, analytical, assessing me. "You wish to speak?" His voice was the same as during the negotiations. Perfect, controlled, inhuman. I cleared my throat. I was wondering if you remembered me," I said. "We were tested together, 40 years ago, in Umbar. We were the final 2 candidates." He tilted his head slightly, as if examining me from a different angle. And then he spoke. "I do not remember. The memories of that time, of that person, were severed during the ritual that made me what I am. If we knew each other as children, that knowledge is gone. I am the Mouth of Sauron. What I was before is irrelevant." His voice held no curiosity, no recognition, no interest. I was a stranger to him, less than a stranger. A stranger might provoke curiosity. I provoked nothing. I tried again. "You had a name, before. You had a family. Do you remember any of it?" He was silent for a moment. "Then, I had a name. It was burned. I had memories. They were cut away. What remains is only what serves the Dark Lord. That is all I am. That is all I need to be." I felt something break inside me then, because I understood. This was not a man pretending to be a vessel. This was not someone who had buried his humanity deep and could be reached. The boy I had known was truly gone, erased. What stood before me was a tool, a function, something that spoke and negotiated and served, but did not feel, did not want, did not exist as an individual in any meaningful sense. I had wondered for 40 years if some part of him remained, trapped and suffering. I had been wrong. There was no trapped consciousness. There was no suffering. There was just absence. He had been erased so completely that there was nothing left to suffer. "Did you choose this?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse. "Or were you forced?" He looked at me, and I could feel confusion in that gaze, as if the question made no sense. "I chose," he said. "The ritual requires consent. Without consent, the binding does not take. I stood in the chamber. I wrote my name in blood. I spoke it 3 times. I burned it in the black fire. I chose each step, and I do not regret it. Regret requires a self. I have no self to regret." He paused. "Why do you ask? Were you also tested?" I nodded. "I was the other one, the one who refused." He studied me for a moment longer. "Then you chose differently. I chose to serve with absolute dedication. You chose to remain as you are. Neither choice is wrong. They are simply different paths." But his voice held no judgment, no superiority, no contempt, just statement of fact. And somehow that was worse. Because if he had mocked me, if he had suggested I had chosen cowardice over strength, I could have defended my choice. I could have argued, but he offered nothing. No validation and no condemnation. Just acknowledgement that I had chosen one thing and he had chosen another. "Do you ever wonder what you lost?" I asked, desperate now, needing some sign that he was still human underneath. He shook his head slowly. "How can I wonder about something I do not remember? The memories were severed, the attachments were cut. I know intellectually that I had a family, a childhood, preferences and desires. But I do not miss them because I cannot recall them. It would be like asking if I miss a meal I do not remember eating. The question has no meaning." He turned back to his documents. "If there is nothing else, I have work to complete." I stood there for a moment longer, searching for something to say. Some way to reach through the emptiness. And then I realized there was nothing to reach. The boy was gone, had been gone for 40 years, and what remained did not need reaching. It was complete in its own way, perfect in its function. I bowed, though he did not see it, and I walked away. And I understood, finally, that I had made the right choice. Not because his choice was wrong, but because I could not have borne it. I could not have burned my name and emerged as that. A voice without a person. A function without a self. He had chosen that willingly, had embraced it, and it worked for him because he no longer existed to suffer from it. But I would have. The part of me that he had erased would have remained in me, screaming, and I would have spent 40 years in agony. Later that night, I spoke with one of the servants who worked in the mouth section of the tower, an old woman who had been there for decades. I asked her about him, about what he was like outside of formal duties. She looked at me strangely. "He is not like anything outside of duties," she said. "He exists to serve. When he is not conducting negotiations or interrogations or delivering Sauron's commands, he studies. He practices languages. He reviews histories. He prepares. There is no outside of duty for him. There is only the function he performs." I asked if he ever seemed unhappy, frustrated, lonely. She shook her head. "Those are human emotions. He is not human anymore, not in the way you mean. He is the mouth, that is all." I asked her about the ritual, about what she had heard happened during the ceremony that transformed candidates into the mouth. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I have heard it described by those who prepared the chamber. There are 3 cuttings. First, the written name is sealed away. Second, the spoken name is severed, so he cannot even pronounce it anymore. Third, the memories are burned away with rune-marked tools. And then the final burning, where the last record of the name turns to ash. and with each step, something breaks, or something is lost, until what remains is just the vessel. She looked at me with something like pity. You were tested with him, yes? You refused. I nodded. Then you made the wiser choice. Power is not worth that price, not for anyone with a soul left to lose. But I wondered, did I make the wiser choice, or just the easier one? The Mouth of Sauron wields power beyond anything I will ever possess. When he speaks, armies obey. When he negotiates, kingdoms tremble. He serves the greatest power in Middle-earth with perfect dedication and perfect skill, and I am just a captain, aging, ordinary, forgotten by history. Is wisdom choosing to remain small and human? Or is wisdom choosing to become something greater even if it costs everything? I still do not know. But I know that when I saw him, when I looked into that emptiness where a person used to be, I felt no envy, only a kind of horror, and relief that it was not me. The negotiations lasted 3 days. I watched him work each day, and each day I was struck by his perfection. He never made mistakes, never showed uncertainty, never revealed anything that could be called weakness or humanity. He was a tool, and tools do not doubt, do not question, do not suffer existential crisis about their purpose. They simply function, and he functioned flawlessly. On the final day, after the Haradrim envoys had left and the agreements had been finalized, I saw him one more time. He was walking through a corridor, alone, his helm removed, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. It was not the face of the boy I had known. Age had changed it, yes, but it was more than that. But there was something missing in the eyes, some quality that makes a face human. He looked through me as he passed, not seeing me as a person, but as an object, another piece of furniture in the corridor. And I understood that he saw everything that way now, because he was not a person seeing other people. He was a function processing inputs. I left Barad-dur 2 days later and returned to Umbar, returned to my ordinary life and my ordinary service. And I have thought about him every day since, about the choice he made and the choice I made, about what it means to serve, about what it costs to give yourself completely to something greater. And I have concluded this: he was braver than me, stronger than me, more dedicated than me. He was willing to sacrifice everything, even his own existence, for power and purpose. I was not willing, but I chose to keep myself, my name, my small human concerns. And that makes me weaker in some sense, less committed, less pure in my service. But it also makes me human, and I would rather be a weak human than a perfect tool. There is something else I learned during my time in Barad-dur, something the old servant told me in confidence. The Mouth of Sauron is not a single person. It is a succession. There have been 8 of them over the centuries, each one trained and transformed and eventually dying or being killed to be replaced by the next. And when each new mouth undergoes the ritual, something of the previous mouths remains. Their knowledge, their techniques, their experiences, passed down through some mechanism I do not understand. So when the 8th mouth speaks, he speaks with the accumulated wisdom of 8 masters of language and manipulation spanning thousands of years. He is not just one erased person. He is 8 erased persons layered on top of each other. And that made it worse somehow, because it meant that the boy I knew did not just cease to exist. He was added to a collective. His knowledge, his skills, his training, these were preserved and combined with 7 others before him. But his self, his identity, his name, these were destroyed. So he exists in a sense, contributing to the function of the mouth. But he does not exist as a person. He is part of a tool that has been refined over millennia, a component in a machine. And someday, there will be a ninth mouth. And the boy I knew will be one more voice in that vessel's head, one more layer of accumulated experience, or one more piece of the collective, forever serving, forever nameless, forever erased. I think about my father sometimes, about what he said to me the night before I made my choice. He said a name is not a small thing, that it connects us to our ancestors, to our family, to our history. And he was right. My name is Hazad. I am the son of Zimrahil. I am descended from the king's men who fled Númenor when it fell. I carry that history in my name, and the boy who became the mouth carries nothing. No history, no connection, no identity. Just function, just purpose, just service. And I cannot help but feel that something precious was lost when he burned his name. Something that cannot be measured in power or effectiveness or dedication. But I also understand why he chose it. Because he believed, truly believed, that individual existence was less important than service to something greater, that the self was an illusion, a weakness, something to be transcended. And for him, maybe that was true. Maybe he found peace in the erasure, found completion in becoming a vessel. I cannot know because he no longer exists to tell me. What exists now is the mouth, and the mouth has no regrets because it has no self to regret. So perhaps his choice was not tragic. Perhaps it was enlightened in some way I cannot comprehend. Perhaps by erasing himself, he achieved something I never will. Freedom from the burden of individual consciousness. Unity with purpose. Transcendence of the small human concerns that plague people like me. Or perhaps he was simply destroyed. Perhaps what I saw in that chamber was not enlightenment, but obliteration. Perhaps the ritual did not elevate him, but annihilated him, leaving behind only a useful corpse that walks and talks and serves. I do not know. I will never know, because the only one who could answer that question no longer exists to be asked. All I know is that I saw him. I spoke to him, and I felt grateful that I had refused. Grateful that I still have my name. Grateful that when I look in the mirror, I see a person, flawed and ordinary and weak, but a person nonetheless. Not a vessel, not a tool, not a function, a man. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you are listening to these stories, these voices from the shadows of history, then perhaps you are interested in the choices people make, the paths they take, the prices they pay. If you want to hear more, if you want to understand how people choose darkness or light or the complicated spaces in between, then stay. Listen. Subscribe to Whispers from the Shire, because there are more stories, more choices, more people who stood at crossroads and chose one path or another, and their stories matter. Thank you. I am 52 years old now. I have served Sauron for 40 years in conventional ways. I have fought his battles. I have killed his enemies. I have advanced his interests. And I have done all of this while keeping my name, while remaining Hazad, son of Zimrahil, while being a person who makes choices, even if those choices are sometimes wrong. The boy who became the Mouth of Sauron served more perfectly than I ever could, more completely, more absolutely, but he paid a price I could not pay, and I do not judge him for that. I do not condemn his choice or celebrate mine. I simply acknowledge that we chose differently, and that both of us have lived with the consequences. Sometimes I wonder what will happen to him. The war is coming. Everyone can feel it. The final confrontation between Sauron and the West. And the Mouth will play a role in that. He will ride to the Black Gate. He will deliver ultimatums to the armies of Gondor and Rohan. He will speak with the accumulated wisdom of 8 masters of rhetoric, spanning 3,000 years. And he will do it perfectly, without doubt, without fear, without any human weakness. And perhaps he will die there, cut down by some hero of the West. And if he does, he will die without regret, without fear, without even really dying, because a tool cannot die. It can only stop functioning. And his knowledge will be passed to the 9th Mouth, and the cycle will continue. And I will die eventually as well, in battle or of old age, or in some other mundane way. And I will die as Hazad. I will die with my name, with my memories of my father and my family and my life, with my regrets and my satisfactions and my complicated human feelings. And no one will remember me, except perhaps my family, for a generation or two. I will not become part of anything eternal. I will not serve beyond death. I will simply end. And I am at peace with that, because I would rather end as myself than continue forever as something else. The last time I saw him, I asked one final question. I asked if he was happy, and he looked at me with that empty gaze and said, "Happiness is irrelevant. Happiness is a human emotion that serves no purpose in my function. I am the Mouth of Sauron. I exist to serve. That is enough." And he meant it, not as a rationalization, not as a defense, but as simple truth. He did not need happiness, did not want it, did not even understand why I would ask, because he had erased the part of himself that could care about such things, and I walked away knowing that I would never understand him, never reach him, never convince him that he had lost something valuable, because from his perspective, he had lost nothing. He had traded the illusion of self for the reality of purpose, and he was content. But I am not convinced. I cannot be convinced, because I have seen what that trade looks like from the outside. And it looks like death. Not physical death. Something worse. The death of personhood. The erasure of everything that makes an individual matter. He is useful, powerful, effective. But he is not alive in any way that I recognize as life. He is a mechanism. A very sophisticated mechanism, yes, but a mechanism nonetheless. And I would rather be a flawed, weak, ordinary human being than the most perfect mechanism ever created. So I will continue to serve Sauron as I have always served. As a soldier, as a captain, as a man with a name and a history and a self. And the boy who became the Mouth will continue to serve as he serves, as a vessel, as a voice, as a tool perfected over millennia. And our paths will never cross again, because we exist in different worlds now. He exists in a world of pure function, pure service, pure purpose. And I exist in the world of humans, with all our weakness and doubt and complicated, messy humanity. And I have chosen my world. I chose it 40 years ago when I said no, and I choose it again every day when I wake up and remember my name. I was almost the Mouth of Sauron. I passed the tests. I survived the trials. And I said no, and he said yes. And for 40 years I have wondered if I chose correctly. But now I know. I saw him. I spoke to him. I looked into the emptiness where a person used to be, and I understood that I chose life over function, weakness over perfection, humanity over power. And I do not regret it. Not anymore, because I would rather die as Hazad than live forever as the Mouth. I would rather be forgotten as myself than remembered as a vessel. I would rather matter to the few people who know my name than matter to history as something nameless. But that is my choice, and I will live with it, and die with it, and be at peace.